we were still rather a fledgling community, one could say. And we were just finding our way. People were depressed, people were angry, people were just frustrated as all get out over what was going on, but we didn't have the capacity to respond. And when I compare Chicago and Dearborn and Paterson, as I did in my article in '82 with what happened this year, it was night and day. We have Arab American mayors in Paterson, Arab American mayor in Dearborn. We have a state rep in Chicago, and we got city councils in all these areas to pass resolutions, and more than that, they've made quite an impact in terms of the public discourse on how we see Arab Americans, one, and how the role that Arab Americans can play in American politics. The guy who's been getting so much attention, a real leader in our community, is the mayor of Dearborn. We're going to start with him, Abdullah Hammoud, who has done an incredible job leading that community as a community on the broad range of issues that face the community. But also, when this crisis occurred in Gaza, he took a lead. And when as you've all seen in press coverage, when the Biden administration wanted to get meetings, the place to go is to start with the mayor, because he represents that community so well. Abdullah, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you all so much for having me. I just want to take note that the mayor of Dearborn, Michigan was on time. So have that reflected in the record. But it's great to be with you all, and what a time to be in Arab American Heritage Month at in this year of all years, and with everything that's unfolding around us, and obviously with, I think, the heightened focus on the Arab American community and their role in the broader national conversation and international conversation.
Tell me first, as I begin, I'm going to ask everybody this question, but what led you into public service?
Not getting into medical school. Honestly, it's for me, Dearborn is home. It's the greatest city in the greatest country in the world, and I know we'll argue about this. And at a point in my life, with a lot happening on the personal side, I really wanted to dedicate and give back to this community that's provided myself and my family with absolutely everything that we've ever had. And that's what led me to public service, was the opportunity to give back and to really try to move the needle. I firmly believe that policy is a lever for change, but nobody who looked like me, sounded like me, had a name like me, had a finger on that lever. And this was an opportunity to change that conversation.
And in 1985, when we started the Institute, our first outing in Dearborn was the guy running for mayor talked about, what do we do with the Arab problem? They don't share our values. They don't share our darn good way of life. They're ruining our city. And today, it's a very different Dearborn. It wasn't the problem of Dearborn, as he called it. You were the promise of Dearborn, and that promise is bearing fruit.
And I appreciate that. It's hard to believe that's how far we've come. You know, in 1987, Mayor Mike Guido was polling third in the mayoral race, and he launched the mailer saying, "Let's talk about the Arab problem," which projected him to the first place and ultimately winning the mayorship. The chief of staff, Mark Guido, served from 1987 till December 31, 2021. Just to put that in perspective. So although Mayor Guido departed, the administration he constructed and built was still there. And so, but here we are.
Well, congratulations to that. And I want to ask you, you know, the issue of Arab American heritage. I mean, I remember Guido's stuff. It was actually 85, not 87. It was 85.
87, yeah.
I remember they don't share our values. They don't share, they're ruining our darn good way of life. It actually, the Arab community has given Dearborn new life. It's not a city on the slide. It's a city that's growing. And you feel proud of that, don't you?
I mean, you put us against, we buck every trend that Michigan is known for. You know, while Michigan is trailing in population, we're the fastest growing city in the world. We have obviously home of Ford Motor Company, and you hear my daughter. We're obviously home of Ford Motor Company, but we have a thriving small business entrepreneurship community, largely immigrants and refugees from the out of diaspora. And so it's actually beautiful to see. And I think we shatter poverty than better than just about any other community because we have multi-generational dwellings where all these small businesses have multiple families that they're uplifting. And as they expand and thrive, they're uplifting more families. And so it's just been an absolutely phenomenal experience here in Dearborn.
Let me go to what I call Dearborn East. And sometimes I call you guys Paterson West, but we'll leave that for now.
I thought we
And
called them
the
Dearborn
mayor,
Light.
huh?
I thought we called them Dearborn Light.
Oh, that's fighting words here. Let me go with to Andre Sayegh in Paterson, a city that just named, not just a year ago, named its main street Palestine Way. Andre, are you with us?
Marhaba, Jim.
Hmm? How you doing? Where are you?
Marhaba,
I don't
Jim.
see. There you are. So tell me, the same questions. What led you into public service, man?
Well, first, we named Main Street Palestine Way 2 years ago, and we're
Okay.
celebrating the anniversary on May 14th. Last year, I hosted the mayor of Ramallah, and we signed a sister city agreement between Ramallah and Paterson. And then we designated that same section as Little Ramallah. And you saw the sign, Jim. In fact, I think you got a car accident right by the sign. You were so impressed with the sign, you got into a car. Well, maybe it wasn't you who got in the car accident, but nevertheless, I got involved with the Board of Education. I had just earned my master's degree in public policy and administration from Columbia. And I thought that we could really have an impact on the curriculum because I knew how beneficial a quality education was to me in my life. And I thought I could impart that. And so I ran for school board and I got trounced the first time I ran. But, you know, Arabs are resilient people. We're very tenacious and came back and we won overwhelmingly. And then 3 terms in the council and now in my second term as mayor of the historic city of Paterson.
Thank you, Andre. It's the same story. I mean, back 40, 50 years ago, the Arab community did not have a presence in the city. It had numbers, but not a presence. And it does have one today.
Right.
As you've noted, not just in Paterson itself, highest per capita Palestinian population of any city in the country.
That is correct.
But also a large population in surrounding areas so that local communities around Paterson have also passed ceasefire resolutions in their city councils. Unlike Dearborn, which has a huge, large Arab population. I mean, it's probably majority Arab American, if I'm not mistaken, right, Abdullah? Paterson's not. Was the Arab issue ever a liability for you running, or was it an asset?
You know, I'm not quite sure. See, here's the thing. You're absolutely right. A vast majority of my constituents are Hispanic. So it's like 65%. Then it's African-American, like a little over 20%. And then everybody else. So I ran for mayor multiple times because quite frankly, I am not Hispanic and I am not African-American. But I used to tell the voters, now my constituents, that I don't have to look like you to look out for you. And I believe that really struck a chord, that resonated with the electorate. And they just knew that I had their best interests at heart. As a matter of fact, Jim, one thing we did last year, we reopened a historic stadium, one of only 2 stadiums in the country that hosted Negro League games. So when African Americans were denied the opportunity to play Major League Baseball in the 30s and 40s in these ballparks, and with teams like the Yankees, Cubs, and Red Sox, they played in Paterson. And unfortunately, that stadium was empty and abandoned for 26 years. But we put together tax credits and we brought it back to life. That was last year. And then last week, we opened up a Negro League Baseball museum on the site to tell the story of the legends that played on that field of dreams.
Thank you. I've got one person on who's going to have to be leaving shortly, but I want to get him in right now, and that's Abdelnasser Rashid, who's state rep from Illinois, the Chicago area. Abdelnasser, are you here?
I am. Hey, hi, Jim. Hi, everyone.
Hey, thank you. I know you got to go back to a committee meeting, and I want to get you in before you go. Same story in Chicago. You have the largest Palestinian population in the country in any city, not per capita as in Paterson, but a huge Palestinian population. And city council in Chicago resolution, biggest city in the country to do it on ceasefire and on Palestinian rights. You got a mayor who's speaking out. And it's in large part due to the influence of that community. It's a big difference from 50 years ago.
That's exactly right. First of all, thank you all for your for joining this important conversation. I was just in legislative session and have to head back to committee in about 15 minutes. But yeah, Chicago does have a very active political scene. I was proud to be elected to be the first Palestinian American elected to the legislature in 2022. Just won my primary a couple of weeks ago. So proud and honored that the voters are sending me back to Springfield. And you know, it really has been humbling to see the influence that not just the influence, but the solidarity that other communities and elected officials from other minority groups have been showing to the Palestinian cause and the embrace of the Arab American community and the issues that impact us. Two of the champions fighting for Palestinian rights in Congress are Congressman Chuy Garcia and Congresswoman Delia Ramirez, both from Illinois. We have others, Congressman Jonathan Jackson, Danny Davis, and others who've also stood up for what's right. And just last year, Illinois became the first state in the country to pass, to add the MENA checkbox, Middle Eastern North African checkbox, to state forms for racial classification. So getting ahead of the census in 2030 to start collecting that data right here, right now. So it's been wonderful to be part of that process and to help bring the voice of my district and of our community to Springfield.
Thank you. I'm gonna let you go back to your session because I'm now going to turn to Georgia, to Ruwa, Romman, who's with us, a young'un, a state legislator who's just great and has a dynamic presence. Ruwa, are you with us? There you are. Hi, how are you?
Hi, marhaba, assalamualaikum everybody. My name is Romman and I'm from Georgia. I'm so excited to be with y'all.
Thank you. Tell us how your community, the Arab American community down there, which has grown significantly, and they've some wonderful cultural institutions in the community that I've been participant in some of the activities there. They really quite substantial and done some good things. But did your campaign build on that? Were you in a district that had an Arab American support base, like the three folks who were on before? Or were you running in a district that had no Arab American population of substance to begin with?
Yeah, so I represent what's called West Gwinnett. It's in the metro area of Georgia. We don't have an Arab population in my district. Our state districts are about 60,000 constituents, so smaller than most in terms of legislative districts. But no, my district ironically has it's about 17% Asian, about 30% Black, about 43% white, and then other. So everyone kind of gets lumped in there. I do know of some Arab families that live here, some really, really great advocates. But this kind of shows that if you do the work, and I think somebody had said this earlier, you don't have to look like somebody to be able to represent them and look like them. And we've seen oftentimes there are those that look like us that actually end up hurting our causes. And so it was one of those situations where the community had seen all the work that we had done. And in my case, I've been civically engaged for about 10 years in Georgia, particularly on voting and civic engagement work, and kind of got pushed into this. And we were able to make history last cycle.
Tell me what got you into public service to begin with?
So I worked in the first campaign I ever volunteered for was in 2014. It was the Michelle Nunn, Jason Carter campaign. And that was the first time I learned about how in campaigns, 90% of the work is grunt work. You're knocking doors, you're making phone calls, you're cleaning up data, you're stuffing, envelopes. I tell people, even myself as the candidate / representative, I'm doing that work too. But when I was doing that work, I realized that we can change the state a door at a time, but the campaign wasn't talking to our communities, whether that's the Arab community, the Muslim community, the Asian community more broadly. That was not happening. And so it really changed the way that I looked at politics, because I realized that there was an untapped community that could really change our entire electorate. And that's why you'll see sort of headlines coming out of Georgia that's like the Asian vote has increased by 400%. Muslim participation has grown. I would bet that if we disaggregated some of that data, we would see a sizable Arab population. And again, the president won Georgia by 11,780 votes. There's about 50,000 Arabs in the state of Georgia. They're not as politically active as I would like for them to be, but it was that effort starting in 2014 that led me down this sort of mostly nonprofit space of registering people to vote, getting out the vote, explaining to people what a primary election is. And then I shifted over to the more partisan side. And I think that kind of got me in the mess that I'm in right now.
I have another guy who's going to be with us just in a second. I just want to get him in right now, if I could. Nader Sayegh from Yonkers, a state assemblyman, which is what the position is called in New York. And Nader, I remember going to Yonkers way back when. The community was not engaged in a serious way, and you've made enormous progress in that community, haven't you? Tell me a little about what got you into public service, other than the fact that you've been a dynamo in that community for decades.
Thank you, Jim. First of all, to everybody listening, all of us owe a lot of gratitude to you, Jim. Jim, from many, many years with AD, the Arab American Institute, and ADC, you've been in the forefront, and you've really played a major role in motivating all of us. You've made numerous visits to Yonkers many years ago, and Yonkers in many ways is not different from listening to my counterpart in Paterson, Andre, and others across the country. Arab Americans, I think, have realized, like I have in Yonkers, that you need to have a voice and you need to be involved. And we encouraged our community from years ago, whether it's become a member of the Board of Education or the Parking Authority or civic or youth organizations or criminal justice, you needed to get involved. So in Yonkers, unlike, similar to I'm sure all of our stories, we encourage a lot of participation. A number of years ago, we had multiple registration drives. And one thing I can say for Arab Americans, that once we motivate our community and we get them to register to vote, they're great. In my situation, even though we're anywhere from 4 to 5% of the population in Yonkers, our numbers are much greater because our high turnout in primaries. And I think we've made a very special message to the establishment that when it comes to a primary, when there's 7% of the general public voting, and we can gather some 75% or more of Arab Americans by saying, being to Chabad, there's an election, they don't know the difference, or, care if it's a primary or a general, so the high turnout has been very successful. I got elected in November of 2018 to the New York State Assembly. And it's not easy being the only Arab American in the New York State legislative body, but, went to work with sponsoring legislation where every April, similar to the national, we have New York State honors in April, Arab American heritage, whether it's Jordanian or Yemeni or other flag raising ceremonies. And now in today's time with the conflict in the Middle East, Yonkers, we're pushing resolutions. A resolution will pass in Yonkers, I believe, this week. But the biggest debate is between two factions in the city council trying to see which resolution will pass. So the message to all of us really is, sometimes depending on the circumstances we're involved, we got to be flexible enough, because I rather go to first base and then second base. Sometimes we as Arab American legislators are sometimes put in a very difficult position by our own people, where they want us to begin with very extreme. Let's get a grand slam, let's get a home run. And I say, well, you know what? If we get government at any level, local, a county or state or federal, to move in the direction we want, it's a win. So
Thank
my
you. Thank you,
experience is that.
Thank you. I want to find out more about that resolution. So let me know what's going on there. I want to turn back to you, Abdullah. Tell me if you would about the experience you had in the uncommitted campaign there, which I know was really set a marker for the country. What you all did in Dearborn. I kind of thought after Dearborn did it, we didn't need to do it anywhere else. We made the point. Michigan's going to be decisive no matter what. There's no way to come up with a Democratic map of victory that doesn't have Michigan in the heart of it. And the community turned out in significant numbers.
Okay. So what I'll tell you about the uncommitted campaign is, firstly, credit to the organizers. So to Laila Alabad, to Lexi Zaidan, to Abbas Alriya, they did a phenomenal job. We were able to muster over 100,000 votes and demonstrating that the issue of Gaza is not an issue of Arab Americans or for Muslim Americans, but an issue of a broader electorate. It was multi-ethnic, multi-racial, multi-faith, multi-generational movement that garnered over 100,000 votes. In fact, 73 of 83 counties got over 10% uncommitted vote. Okay. So that was pretty awesome. This is my daughter Mariam, so forgive me.
I do not forgive you. I think it's wonderful.
Yeah. And so that was the best part about the uncommitted vote. And I think we demonstrated through the means that we had of the importance of exercising our vote at the box.
And going back to what Nader was talking about, the percentage of the vote, the overall turnout was low, which is why the uncommitted vote was a high percentage. So a passion behind a vote can make a big difference.
Absolutely. I mean, the pundit said, well, we only got the same percentage as Obama during his reelection, 13%. But on average, only about 20,000 votes were ever cast towards uncommitted. We had over 100,000, so 5 times from a gross numbers perspective. And that's really meaningful, understanding that Trump beat Clinton by 11,000 votes. Biden beat Trump by about 150,000 votes. And so you're right there. We had 2 weeks and a shoestring budget to also organize. And so that was the other factor to this. We literally announced with less than 3 weeks before the primary election on this uncommitted movement, and we had about $200,000 to operate the whole thing. And so that's not much when it comes down to statewide elections and what you can do. And so luckily we had a very organic movement. And I think that's what you're realizing across the country. Organic movements are hard to stop because this is the true feelings and perspectives of the American people. And the message that we sent to Biden was like, we're not going to sit at the sideline. People talk about Trump beat Clinton by 11,000 votes. The reality is 80,000 people skipped the top of the ballot. That is what Biden has to reckon with come this November. People want to be inspired when they go to the ballot box. We don't want to plug our nose and cast our votes for the lesser of two evils.
Andre, talk to me about Paterson, because I know that you all have been trying to push your congressman, without much luck, but you also have had a number of city councils that have stepped forward and said, this is the position we want. What's the momentum there like, and how do you think that carries over? You got a big Senate race coming up, and a congressman who hasn't moved.
No, he hasn't. We've tried our best. We've had our city council adopt a resolution unanimously calling for a ceasefire, and this is almost October, way back in October. Then we had Halden, we had Prospect Park. We've met with him. We've had a vigil at City Hall on President's Day. We made a direct plea to President Biden for an immediate and permanent ceasefire. He didn't attend. I wrote an open letter to the congressman. We've reached out to his office, and unfortunately, it's been to no avail. And then the Palestinian American Community Center in Clifton also made that pitch and plea to the congressman, but unfortunately, he didn't see it that way. So we've been working on other members, other House of Representatives in New Jersey. In fact, Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman and Congressman Donald Payne have called for a permanent ceasefire in New Jersey.
And I see Diab Mustafa's on the call right now.
Mr. Palestinian American Community Center.
Checking on your position. Ruwa, let me go back to you for a minute, because in Georgia, I know Reverend Fahad Abu Akel and others have. We had at our conference in Chicago, we had that incredible minister Jamal Bryant. There's a huge base of Black support in the community around this issue. Are you feeling that in your district and in your area as well?
Yeah, so Georgia's very interesting. Again, the president won by only 11,780 votes, which was about 0.3% of the margin. His margin of victory was 0.3%. We actually, in 10 days, mobilized a Leave It Blank campaign because we don't have an uncommitted option. And we received 2.2% of the vote, meaning 4 times the margin of victory. And in 10 days in a state like Georgia, where there was nothing else on the ballot, was frankly huge, even though, you know, it's a total of like 6,700 votes, but it was statewide across, we had flyering in 19 states, volunteers doing phone banking every night for 10 days. And it was truly because Michigan inspired a lot of people to go, hey, we want to send our own message. And so to your question, one of the things that makes it a little more complicated in Georgia is the fact that you can't get anything done here without a multiracial coalition, a multi-faith coalition. And so everyone is working together in a state that, frankly, its leadership doesn't represent us yet. And when it came to Black clergy in particular, they were some of the first people to stand with us, even last year. They came out to press conferences. Clergy put out open statements. Y'all probably saw the ad that they put out, the New York Times piece. I mean, they were incredible allies. What makes it a little more complicated is this is the cradle of the civil rights movement. We live in Georgia. The vote is sacred. And so a lot of people do feel like they don't want to throw their vote away. So we have been trying to find sort of more creative ways to apply pressure in addition to the Leave It Blank campaign, finding ways for them to talk directly to our members of Congress. I believe as of right now, every single one of our Democrats has signed on to some call for a ceasefire, with the exception of, I think, Lucy McBath. She is my current member of Congress, although she's being moved to a different district. So we'll have Hank Johnson soon. And I will say Atlanta passed a ceasefire resolution in November. It was a little bit different because it was echoing the Carter Center's call for a ceasefire. But having the Carter Center here has really been huge because a lot of people keep kind of turning to them, and they've become a source for like a third-party arbitrator, for lack of a better word. So there's these like little things about Georgia. People kind of tend to write us off as being just another southern state, but when you look a little bit deeper, there is a lot going on here.
Andre, I'm sorry, Nader, I want to come to you for a sec. The Jordanian community is the bulk of the community, if I'm not mistaken, in Yonkers. Is that right?
Yeah, Jordanian Americans are the largest group. You know, and our communities generally settle, you know, in certain parts of the state. And you find more diversification maybe the last 20 years. Now it's a lot more diversified than your initial visits to Yonkers. But it's a very hardworking, vibrant, and I think, you know, politically in Yonkers, and I'm sure we do it elsewhere, we were able to build on the relationship our community had in the medical profession and education and law. Our medical doctors, when I went campaigning, and nearly half of the people I knocked doors on said, well, you know, yes, my doctor is an Arab American, or my lawyer is an Arab American, or, you know, yes, I know the president of the Board of Education is an Arab American. That's why I think, you know, for us, it's crucial that we reach out to our bases and utilize that input that gives us a lot more credibility. So in Yonkers, you know, that was a basic part of my campaign, is to utilize our community strength.
One last thing I want to get at, and I want to talk to Andre for a minute. Andre, you were city council first, and I know that the Abdullah, you were in the state representative first. I have to say, having done this work now for all these years, and one of the things the Institute focused on was encouraging people to run for office. That was a big focus of our work. We got frustrated when people decided, I'm going to run for Senate, and they wake up in the morning, look in the mirror and say, I'm going to be governor, and with no preparation at all. You guys all did it right. You started, Abdullah, you started state rep. Then you go to mayor. Andre, you started city council, went to mayor, and Lord knows what comes next. Talk a little about that building process and what that meant for you. Can I go to you, Andre, first, and then Abdullah, you?
Sure, doctor. And
I mean, I'm sorry, people, Rashida, same thing. Rashida started as a state rep. She was a very important environmental lawyer and dealing with civil rights issues in this. I mean, there's a process going forward. It's not, you don't start, opening day in the majors. You start in the minors and you work your way in. Not everybody's an OAC.
Yeah, I like that, Doc. And I like the baseball reference. I'm a long-suffering, unabashed Mets fan. We can't all root for the Tigers, but nevertheless, or the Braves for that matter, if you're in Georgia, they're much better than the Mets right now. I started on the school board. I was the first Arab American elected to the school board in Paterson, first Arab American elected to city council in Paterson, and first Arab American elected to mayor, and inshallah, first Arab American congressman from New Jersey. And one thing we aim to do here is to encourage other Arab Americans to get elected. So when I became mayor and vacated the council seat, we groomed an Arab American. In fact, he's the first Palestinian American to get elected to the city council here in the city of Paterson. So we want to build a bench. It's important for us to be the first, but we don't want to be the last. So that's quite frankly what we're doing here, just to use another sports reference as far as a bench is concerned, and having the bandwidth. So he's a young man to watch as well. And hopefully when I ascend, he'll want to be mayor, but he's already indicated that it's a little too much work, which is true, but it's not for the faint of heart. But Abdullah and I know we relish our roles for sure. And I want to also, one thing, Jim, on an aside, Abdullah and I have a friendly rivalry. In fact, I was with his one native son, Coach Robert Saleh, the first Muslim head coach of any football team, New York Jets. And I brought him hummus from El Basha. He said it was fantastic. So I don't know if there's any restaurant that can compare to Paterson, because El Basha was just named one of the best restaurants by the USA Today in the country. So I'm throwing down the gauntlet to Dearborn to see if they can come up with something close to the hummus at El Basha.
I do want to have a cook-off. I do want to have a cook-off between Paterson and Dearborn.
Yes, maybe
That
they have
is
better baba
something on my
ganoush, but not
wish
hummus.
list. On my wish list to do. I like El Basha, but El Amir is great.
Oh, come on, Jim. You said El Basha was the best. I got you reported.
I don't think I ever said, no, you know.
Come on. You posted
Abdullah,
on social media.
Abdullah, let's talk
you
for
know-
a minute about this building the bench idea and the idea of, building up in your career rather than trying to start at the top.
There's multiple ways to do this. I think that's the reality to public office. There's no cookie cutter path. I'm somebody who applied to medical school 300 times, failed to get in.
Oh,
Found myself working in public health with my master's degree. My mom said the same thing, Andre. And ultimately found myself running for public office. But what I would say, building the bench is extremely important. You have many organizations, whether it's AAI, MGAGE, so many across the board that are actively training up individuals who want to pursue office. But more importantly, not everybody maybe wants to be in the limelight, but maybe they want to be the chiefs of staff. Maybe they want to be the campaign managers, equally, if not more important. And so we also want to upskill individuals in those pathways as well, because what you're finding, for example, in Congress, when you look to a Cori Bush, well, her chief of staff, former chief of staff, was Abbas Alawiya out of Dearborn, Michigan. You looked at Ghada Al-Kaik, who's in Dan Kilde's office. You looked at Maryam Jalloul, who was the policy legislative director over in AOC's office. All have roots back to our communities who are influencing those intimate conversations in the room when it matters, when decisions are coming up on the board.
And Maya Berry was legislative director to Dave Bonnier.
Yeah, there you go. Maya, shout out to you. And so there's so many things that we can do to uplift the next generation. Al-Abbas Farhat succeeded me as state representative. I actually ran upon Al-Abbas. He was a high school student at the time. I had him intern in my office. He ended up working at Wayne County afterwards, and now came back and ultimately ran for state rep and succeeded me, which was phenomenal. And we're increasing the numbers of Arab Americans that we have on council. I think ultimately, there's so much that we have to do. And I think Andre said it best. What's important is not being first. What's important is doing such a great job that you ensure you're not the last, because the burden placed on us, people are going to look to us and say, hey, the last time we had somebody with a weird sounding name or who wore a hijab or, who prayed in a different direction, it didn't go so well. So let's not repeat that same mistake. So I think we have that extra burden of ensuring that we excel at what we do. so that the next time somebody runs who looks like us, maybe even looks a little bit different or sounds a little bit different, people don't give them or them as hard of a time. And I think that's ultimately what's important. As it pertains to me, what's next? I think right now, fatherhood is, as you see, is a navigation. Might be more difficult than being mayor itself. And wherever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes us, that's where we go.
One quick story about Dearborn. Went there in '85. What to do with the Arab problem? That was the headline on the newspaper. There were 700 registered voters. By '96, it was up to 8,000 registered voters. And we had an event, an AI event, and the mayor came, Guido came, spoke a little Arabic, gave me the key to the city. I don't have the key to the city of Paterson, Andre. I got the one to Dearborn. And the cute thing was, he started to speak, in this little, my dear brothers and sisters. The guy who came with me was the personnel director from the Clinton White House. And he leaned over to me and I told him about the number of registered voters. And he said, son of a bitch knows how to count. And I started using that expression, when you count, you count. And we've shown with voter registration and voter mobilization, you actually can make a difference. The kind of thing that you all are talking about, which is the community can be small in some cities, but if the vote turnout is big, it enhances the overall number. And that's a real testament, I think, to the kind of Arab leadership that we've had in all these communities. Ruwa, when we're talking about mobilizing younger people and bringing them into the process, what are you seeing? And I want to ask a question about exclusion, because we've had that problem. We lived with that problem for decades, right? Where candidates given money back, candidates were, we had an Arab American staff person, they fired him because people put pressure on him not to do it. Marwan's there, can tell us about candidates who were told, don't do this with the Arabs or else whatever. Have you experienced that problem of exclusion, or is it something that we have moved beyond because we've built such a strong base and a strong base of allies?
Yeah, I actually think to some extent we have moved on some things, right? When it comes to staffing folks, for example, when it comes to interns and sort of a lot of these, they're very important positions, but not necessarily the final decision makers. And I love the points that were made earlier about how if you do this, you need to make sure you're doing it right, because you are opening up or even closing a pathway for other people, depending on how you behave and how you do this job. And so I got really lucky. I'm 30 years old. I was allowed to be fearless. And I tell people this all the time. After 9/11, it felt like the quote unquote adults in the room were faced with such intense vitriol and pressure that understandably folks were a lot of times on the defensive. I was 8 years old. My dad would be like, hey, like, keep your head down. No need to be like, the super Palestinian hero in your high school. I grew up in Forsyth County. I actually graduated from the same high school as Marjorie Taylor Greene. And my parents told me to do something and I did the complete opposite. And, everyone knew me as the Palestinian girl in school, chose to wear hijab at a young age. But what that did was, I think for our generation, instilled a sense of fearlessness that never went away because of the paths that were paved for us, so that by the time we were ready to take the mantle, it didn't become a question of, is it possible? It's just when and the right circumstances. And the other thing about Georgia too, and again, this goes back to what I said earlier, folks are starting to realize the only way we change anything is together. Yes, the majority of Democratic voters here, for example, are Black voters. However, we couldn't win the state without the AAPI vote, the Hispanic vote. We needed women, we needed men, we needed young people. My biggest concern, especially after seeing everything that's happened in Gaza, though, is it feels like a lot of the work we did to engage younger voters is being just, thrown out the window. A lot of voters who said, you know what, I'm learning that it's important to do this like incremental disciplined work, are seeing a genocide unfolding, and they are actively telling us, and when I say us, me and my colleagues, that it's becoming unpalatable for them to do this work. And without that energy, without those young people knocking the doors, those are your margin of victories in close states. And so for me, I'm actually worried about that. It's not so much exclusion as it is people feel like the institutions that we've built are so unpalatable, there's no place for them.
Thank you for that point. It echoes what Abdullah said, and it's when I've talked to people in the party, and they say, give me that line about when it comes to a binary choice between Trump and Biden, people will make the right choice. And I say, That's both dangerous and disrespectful. Disrespectful to the hurt and very dangerous because it ignores the fact that they will just as soon stay home or vote for a third party. And I know that having worked with Jackson in the 80s, having worked with Bernie, when people are passionate about something, if you don't respect that passion, they're not going to vote. And I think that's a danger, a real danger. So
Yeah.
thank you for echoing that and bringing it to the surface again as an issue we have to keep talking about. Nader, one last thing, and then we're going to try to take some calls or some questions. And Maya, I want to go to you for that. Nader, reflect a little on just what you've heard about this. How do we get young people into this game when they feel there's no win?
You know, yeah, that's a terrific point. I mean, I find myself in my community, because it's true, due to Gaza, you know, a lot of our people, our base is very upset. And when you talk about the presidential race, all I hear is, I don't like either, or I'm very upset with both. And in my case, in Yonkers, I have a congressional race involved in Jamal Bowman, and Jamal has been very friendly to our issues, and especially Gaza and ceasefire. And so the messaging we've utilized is, look, even if you don't vote, even if you concede the presidency, you know, there's about 10 key races, and maybe our agenda needs to be to send a message, honestly, that AIPAC doesn't always control. And that seems to be the stumbling block for politicians that I run into and talk to, the fear from AIPAC and being targeted. So we're focusing, even though we may honestly not agree with our congressmen on many issues, economics or others, because my community, I can say, is more mainstream. Arab Americans are generally mainstream. They don't like extremism either way. So what I've done, and it works, is getting our community to focus, in my case, on the Bowman race and say, no matter what you feel, the most important issue for us now is to really, if we can't even deliver victory, to go into New York State, into Westchester County, which is honestly a hub of AIPAC support, and to really make it a key race. And if we're able to pull off the Bowman race, I tell our community, then we've sent a message national, and the impact of that is tremendous. So I think we got to be able to take our losses on the presidency, because honestly, either candidate, the way we're looking at it in my turf, is not good for us, you know, unless something drastic changes. But impacting those congressional races should be our target.
Thank you, Nader. Maya, do we have questions we want to throw out?
We have some wonderful discussion. First, I'm going to say that you all bring us such incredible hope during a difficult period. Arab American Heritage Month this month is not quite as celebratory as it needs to be, and we're grateful for your public service, all of you across the board. I also want to point out to Mr. Marwan Fraish that whoever is with you, he also brings me great hope. So just hello to the young man participating in tonight's discussion, because we hope to have him elected to something soon as well. Having said that, one of the conversations that's been going on is the difficulty in going into the elections in November, particularly with regards to the uncommitted movements that have taken place. So I wonder if starting with you, Mayor Sayegh, if you could speak to a bit to how your constituents have been talking to you about what's currently happening in the region, and frankly, the lack of responsiveness to the polling data that we're seeing, to the way constituents are weighing in with their elected officials, yet it doesn't seem to be moving policy yet.
Yeah, thank you. Part of the issue that I illustrated earlier was that we have a congressman who's been there since 1997 and doesn't see it the way we all do. It's generational, clearly is. And we're trying to move the needle, but unfortunately that has been the case. That's why I said earlier, like in the next election, I plan to be the first Arab American congressman so that we can have another voice in Washington advocating for Arab Americans, for Palestinians, for equal rights and for human rights. That's all we're at. We're not asking for much. We're asking for the basics.
Do you find that it's translating on the local level? Like, are your constituents raising this? I mean, it's a local city, but is it?
Yeah. Well, I'm starting to see a number of African Americans who are coalescing behind this issue. They're really gravitating towards it because they see some similarities. As a matter of fact, when I alluded to President's Day, when we made that direct pitch and plea to President Biden, one of the African American pastors that spoke on the steps of City Hall said, as a Black man, he was re-traumatized to see what was going on in Palestine.
No, I was wondering if either Nader or Ruwa want to come in on that point as well.
So, I think one of the things that constituent wise, I try to do a lot of town halls at least once a quarter. During session, I did them more often because our session is only from January to March, or end of March. And I've seen sort of a change, right? Like, in general, I think the Palestinian cause has become a lot more known to more and more and more people in the United States. I think that people recognizing the parallels, for example, between Jim Crow and what's happening to Palestinians has really spoken to a lot of our allies, particularly in the Black community. I always tell people that when I went, it was like experiencing Jim Crow in the desert. And I finally had an opportunity to see it for myself. It's like you went back in time, and that's really powerful. We're seeing a lot more people being more willing to talk about this. The thing is, on a constituent people level, the overtime window has shifted. Even when this first started, right? Like this, and I'm saying this current chapter of this long novel that we've all been reading, there were a lot of people, even as early as October, that were like, we still stand with the Palestinian people. And I didn't expect that. And the coalition that I'm seeing emerge is multi-generational, multi-faith, multiracial. I've never seen it before. I think there's a major change. Now, politics takes longer to reflect that change. And for those who feel very dejected as we enter, this cycle, I do agree. I think you can't really start making change at the presidential level. You have to start locally. That's where you get the most wins. These ceasefire resolutions are not a waste of time. They're increasing awareness. Going and talking to your state legislators and asking them to talk to their members of Congress is huge. It's a great way to do upward pressure by leveraging the people closest to your front door. That includes not just your city council people, again, but also people like me at the state level. I've personally liaisoned with our 2 senators and ensured that they met with Palestinian constituents. In fact, for a while, we actually had almost a meeting with them every other week, whether by Zoom or in person, to kind of break them out of that DC bubble. Because the reality is they are surrounded by these contractors and lobbyists who frankly benefit from war. And unlike healthcare, they don't have a personal experience with Palestine. So getting them to actually hear from, for example, a Christian Palestinian family whose mom is, hiding out in a church that keeps getting bombed is really powerful, because suddenly that's a direct understanding of, hey, maybe our intelligence ally is lying to us. This is a direct example of this. And how do we get around that? And again, one of my members of Congress, for whatever reason, just is really terrible on this in terms of Democrats. But again, I remind people, like I saw a question in the chat that's like, why not just build a third party? But the reality is not a single Republican has openly called for a ceasefire. But we have had a lot of Democrats call for a ceasefire. What are we doing to ensure that they come back to Congress and show that if you stand with our community, we will stand with you? So, I like to remind people that if you want to see a better presidential candidate in 10 years, you have to do the work now. Barack Obama took the fast route in 10 years. President Biden took him 50 years. Everything we do today prevents this from happening in the future. And if we had just started this work 20 years ago, I firmly believe we'd be in a different place. But I think we owe it to everybody still alive to keep pushing this and be as strategic as possible.
Ron, let me just tell you, number one, you said in your lifetime this was new. In my lifetime, this is new. 50 years ago, I used to say, when the demonstration in front of the White House had maybe a couple dozen people, and the chant was, Carter, Carter, you should know we support the BLO. That's not where it is anymore. It's the composition is so different. And number two, the thing I always think about is that we're gratified that people are supporting us, right? But at the same time, we have a responsibility to be supporting them.
Yep.
And that's something we don't do to the extent that we need to. So yeah, candidate may not agree with us on our issue, but our allies need that candidate to support them on their issues, and we have to be there for them. We can't be silent on issues of race, on issues of equity for gay and lesbian members of our community. We can't be silent on healthcare. We can't be silent on senior citizens and disability. We want them to support us. We got to support them back. And so it's a much more complicated picture than we sometimes make it out to be. And I think we need to pay attention to that. And I thank you for your leadership on all this. And Nader, I'm going to come to you and ask you, because you've been a coalition builder.
Yes, we have. Even today, just as an example, on the floor of the Assembly, I again sponsored a Celebrate Diversity resolution. And I used it and spoke even today on, and that's why sometimes we got to be not perceived as one issue oriented. In other words, we'll always wear our Arab American hat or our Islamic hat or other hats, but we got to be able to always tie into the general audience. Today we spoke, on the resolution and expressed how it's crucial to respect every group, respect people suffering, respect the fact that when there's issues, without mentioning Gaza, for example, on this resolution, the point was made that no matter what the issue, what the suffering here in our state, our nation, the world, we got to put ourselves in other people's shoes and understand what they're going through. And you look around the room, and people may openly not agree with us are not in their heads like, yeah, definitely we have to do that. Last week, in the Education Committee, Higher Ed in the Assembly, a group of legislators tried to pass legislation that criminalizes, Palestinian or Gaza supporters from speaking up on college campuses. And I spoke up and put a stop to it using the freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and making a point of stressing what do we get into when we're looking to silence our young generation, our college students. But let me say that, we've come a long way. And I've been involved for many years, and there's been a lot of ups and downs, but we got to continue our efforts. I have an online newsletter that I send out every single week to about 8,000 people in my district. And the message in my newsletter always ends, since the Gaza conflict, with a strong message concerning Gaza, immediate ceasefire, encouraging peace dialogue, release of not only hostages, release of prisoners being held by Israel and so forth. And Jamal Bowman, going back to the congressional race, recently came out with his survey showing nearly 2/3 of all constituents that he's reached out support a permanent ceasefire. That's helping his campaign, for example. So, even though we may have ups and downs in the road, for everybody who's listening, keep it up and, keep speaking up. And sometimes you gotta present broad messages that get the point across or make it more feasible for us.
Thank you, Andrew. See if we can get Andre. Are you still with us?
I think Andre's there. He is.
Thank you.
Final words, Andre.
Oh, I'm honored, Jim. Thank you. Well, I'll tell you, this is very encouraging.
Well, Dearborn left the house, so you're
That's true. Well, he had to put his daughter to sleep, so
okay.
That is quite commendable. But I will tell you this, Jim, I really appreciate your leadership. There was a time in 1984, or I'm sure, and we're talking 40 years ago, when you felt like you were alone. Well, look at all of us. You're definitely not alone. You have built a bench, and we're a deep bench, and we're going to keep deepening that bench so that our voices are heard, and that ultimately, when the Democratic Party not so much the Republican Party. When they put their respective platforms together, a major plank will be a free Palestine.
Thank you, guys. Listen, to quote my uncles, you make me proud. It's a great group, and we could have had so many more other elected officials that we'd reached out to. But I thank you guys for joining us today. I thank you for your public service, and I thank you for your pride in your being Arab American and not ducking and hiding it, and for the leadership you're showing in your communities. And